Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Night. I have a collection of stories that might just make you rethink your own workplace. These are not your average bad boss tales or water cooler gossip. These are the stories that pushed real people to the edge, stories so chilling, so unsettling, that the only option left was to walk away and never look back. So, settle in, turn down the lights, and let's begin with the first of 10 true stories that made people quit their jobs forever. I used to work as a night security guard at a small regional hospital. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I liked the quiet. Most nights, I'd do my rounds, check the doors, and maybe chat with the nurses if they were bored. The hospital was old, with long, echoing hallways and a basement that always felt a few degrees colder than the rest of the building. I'd heard stories from the staff, strange noises, lights flickering, the usual stuff you'd expect in a place where people are born and die every day. I never paid much attention, until one night, when I was doing my rounds on the third floor, the old wing, which had been closed for renovations for months. I was walking past the empty patient rooms when I heard a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from one of the rooms at the end of the hall. I stopped, listened, and told myself it was probably a loose window or a pipe. But the tapping continued, steady and deliberate. I radioed in, but no one answered. I decided to check it out, flashlight in hand. The room was pitch black, the only light coming from the hallway behind me. As I stepped inside, the tapping stopped. I swept my flashlight across the room, empty, except for an old hospital bed and a chair in the corner. I was about to leave when I heard a whisper, so faint I thought I imagined it. "Help me." I froze. The air felt heavy, and I could see my breath, even though it was the mate, idle of summer. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me. I yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Then from the corner, I saw a shape. Small, hunched, almost childlike, crawling out from under the bed. Its eyes were wide, unblinking, and it moved with a jerky, unnatural motion. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, and suddenly it flew open. I stumbled into the hallway, heart racing, and looked back. The room was empty. I quit the next morning. I never went back, and I never told anyone what I saw. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear that whisper, "Help me." My first job out of high school was at a massive distribution warehouse. The pay was decent, and the hours were long, but I didn't mind. I liked the routine, the hum of the conveyor belts, the smell of cardboard and dust. The warehouse was a maze of shelves and pallets, and at night, it felt like another world. There were always stories among the workers about the shadow man who wandered the aisles after midnight, about the cold spots near the loading docks. I thought it was just a way to pass the time. Until the night I saw him for myself, it was a slow shift, and I was assigned to inventory in the far corner of the building, near the old freight elevator. I was scanning boxes when I felt a sudden chill, like someone had opened a freezer behind me. I turned, expecting to see a coworker, but the aisle was empty. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure, tall, thin, and impossibly dark, standing at the end of the row. I blinked, and he was gone. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. Every time I turned a corner, I caught glimpses of movement, shadows that didn't belong. At one point, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, echoing off the concrete floor. I spun around, but no one was there. I finished my shift in a panic, barely able to focus. When I got home, I found deep scratches on my arms, like I'd brushed against something sharp, but I couldn't remember how I got them. I called in sick the next day, and the day after that. Eventually, I just stopped showing up. I never collected my last paycheck. Some things aren't worth the money. I worked as a housekeeper at a historic hotel in New Orleans. The building was beautiful, with ornate moldings, grand staircases, chandeliers that looked like they belonged in a palace. But the staff all knew the place had a reputation. Guests would complain about strange noises, cold spots, and the feeling of being watched. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I respected the stories. One afternoon, I was assigned to clean room 409, which had been vacant for a week. The door was locked, and the "Do Not Disturb" sign was still hanging, but the front desk assured me it was empty. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the curtains were drawn tight. As I started to strip the bed, I heard the bathroom door creak open. I called out, thinking maybe a guest had snuck in, but there was no answer. I walked to the bathroom, heart pounding, and found the door ajar. Inside, the mirror was fogged, as if someone had just taken a hot shower. On the glass, written in dripping condensation, were the words, "Get out." I dropped my cleaning supplies and ran. I told my manager I couldn't work in that room again. He just nodded, like he'd heard it all before. I finished my shift, but I never went back. Some places are better left alone. I was a nurse in a small-town nursing home, the kind of place where everyone knows each other and the residents become like family. I'd worked there for almost 5 years, and while it could be exhausting, I loved my job. But there was one room at the end of the West Wing that always made me uneasy. The staff called it the cold room. No matter how high the heat was turned up, it was always chilly, and the air felt heavy, like it was thick with secrets. Residents who stayed there never lasted long. Either they were moved for their own comfort, or, more often, they passed away within weeks. One night, I was working the late shift. The halls were quiet. The only sounds the distant hum of the vending machine and the occasional cough from a resident's room. I was doing my rounds when I heard a faint voice coming from the cold room. The resident, Mrs. Hargrove, was a sweet woman in her 90s, but she'd been declining rapidly. I stepped inside, and she was sitting up in bed, staring at the corner. "He's here again," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. I asked her who she meant, but she just shook her head and pointed. I looked, but saw nothing. I tried to comfort her, tucking her in and promising to check on her again soon. As I turned to leave, I felt a sudden drop in temperature, so cold it made my breath visible. The lights flickered, and I heard a low, guttural growl from the corner. I spun around, but the room was empty. Mrs. Hargrove was trembling, clutching my hand so tightly it hurt. I stayed with her until she fell asleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. She passed away that night. I gave my notice the next morning. I still dream about that room, and I wonder if whatever was there is still waiting for its next visitor. My first real job was at a textile factory on the outskirts of town. The building was ancient, with high ceilings, rusted machinery, and windows so dirty you could barely see outside. The work was monotonous, feeding fabric into machines, checking for defects, stacking boxes. But the pay was good, and I needed the money. The factory ran 3 shifts, and I usually worked the graveyard. There were always stories about the place, about workers who died in accidents, about the old man who wandered the floor at night, about the machines that would start up on their own. One night, I was working alone in my section when I heard the sound of footsteps on the catwalk above me. I looked up, expecting to see the supervisor, but the walkway was empty. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, echoing through the cavernous space. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my work, but then the machines started acting up. One by one, they powered on, even though I hadn't touched the controls. The lights flickered, and I heard a voice whisper my name, so close it felt like someone was standing right behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. The machines kept running, fabric whipping through at impossible speeds. I hit the emergency stop, but nothing happened. The noise was deafening, and I felt a wave of panic rise in my chest. Suddenly, everything stopped. The lights came back on, the machines powered down, and the footsteps faded away. I grabbed my things and left, not even bothering to clock out. I never set foot in that factory again. Sometimes, when I drive by, I see a figure standing in the window, watching. I worked in a high-rise office building downtown, the kind with endless rows of cubicles and fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. My job was mind-numbing. Data entry, spreadsheets, and endless emails. But it was safe, predictable, and I liked my coworkers. The only thing that ever felt off was the emergency stairwell. It was narrow, dimly lit, and always smelled faintly of mildew. People joked that it was haunted, but I never took it seriously, until the day I got stuck. It was a Friday afternoon, and the elevators were out for maintenance. I decided to take the stairs down from the 14th floor. As I descended, the lights flickered, and I heard footsteps echoing above me. I paused, waiting for someone to catch up, but no one appeared. I kept going, but the footsteps followed, always just out of sight. By the 7th floor, I was starting to panic. The air felt thick, and the walls seemed to close in. I tried the door to the 6th floor, but it was locked. So was the next one, and the next. I started running, heart pounding, but every door was locked tight. The footsteps grew louder, faster, until they were right behind me. I turned, but the stairwell was empty. I pounded on the doors, screaming for help, but no one answered. Finally, I reached the ground floor, and the door swung open easily. I stumbled out into the lobby, gasping for air. My boss asked if I was okay, but I couldn't explain what had happened. I quit that day. I still avoid stairwells whenever I can. I was a server at a family-owned Italian restaurant, the kind of place that had been around for decades and was filled with regulars who knew everyone by name. The building was old, with creaky floors and faded wallpaper, but it had charm. I'd worked there for almost 2 years, and while the hours were long and the pay wasn't great, I loved the people. But there was one table in the back corner that no one liked to serve. It was tucked away near the kitchen, half hidden by a heavy velvet curtain. The staff called it the cold table, and it was always colder than the rest of the dining room, no matter how high the heat was turned up. One night, I was assigned to that section. It was a slow evening, and the only customers at the cold table were an older couple who barely spoke. They ordered coffee and dessert, and I tried to make small talk, but they just stared at me with blank expressions. As I cleared their plates, I noticed the woman's hands were ice cold, even though the rest of the restaurant was warm. She looked up at me and whispered, "Don't stay here after closing." I laughed it off, thinking she was just being dramatic, but her eyes were dead serious. After closing, I was helping the manager count the register when we heard a crash from the dining room. We rushed out to find the cold table overturned, chairs scattered, and the velvet curtain torn from its rod. There was no one else in the building. The security cameras showed nothing, just the table flipping over on its own. I quit the next day. The restaurant closed a few months later, and the building has been empty ever since. Sometimes when I walk by, I see the curtain moving in the window, even though there's no one inside. My first office job was at a call center for a major insurance company. The building was a converted warehouse, with rows of cubicles and the constant hum of voices and ringing phones. The work was stressful, but I needed the money. The only thing that ever felt strange was the break room. It was small, windowless, and always felt a few degrees colder than the rest of the office. People joked that it was haunted, but I never believed it, until the night I stayed late to finish some paperwork. It was after midnight, and the office was empty except for me and the janitor. I was sitting at my desk when I heard a voice whisper my name. I looked up, but no one was there. I tried to ignore it, but the whisper came again, louder this time. I stood up, heart pounding, and walked toward the break room. The door was ajar, and I could see the light flickering inside. As I stepped closer, I heard voices. Dozens of them, all whispering at once, overlapping and echoing off the walls. I pushed the door open, and the room went silent. On the table was my phone, screen lit up, even though I hadn't touched it. A message was displayed. "We hear you." I grabbed my things and ran. I never went back. A few weeks later, I heard the building had been condemned due to structural issues. I still wonder if it was something else that drove everyone out. I worked construction for most of my 20s, moving from site to site, building everything from houses to office towers. It was hard work, but I liked being outside and working with my hands. One summer, we were renovating an old hotel downtown. The building had been abandoned for years, and the inside was a mess, peeling wallpaper, broken windows, and a thick layer of dust on everything. The crew joked about the place being haunted, but I didn't pay much attention. That changed the day we found the hidden room. We were tearing down a wall on the 3rd floor when we discovered a small, windowless room that wasn't on any of the blueprints. Inside were old toys, a rusted bed frame, and a stack of yellowed newspapers from the 1940s. The air was thick and musty, and the whole place felt wrong. As we cleared out the debris, I found a diary tucked under the mattress. The entries were written in a shaky hand, describing a child who had been locked in the room for months, maybe years. The last entry was just a single word: help. That night I had nightmares about the room, about a child's voice calling out, about hands reaching through the walls. The next day, I told my foreman I couldn't work there anymore. He didn't ask why. I heard later that several other workers quit after seeing strange things: shadows moving in empty rooms, tools disappearing, voices whispering in the dark. The hotel was eventually demolished, but I still think about that hidden room and the secrets it held. My last job before I changed careers was at a small, family-owned convenience store. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and the regulars would stop by just to chat. The store was old, with creaky floors and flickering lights, but it had a certain charm. The only thing that ever bothered me was the security mirror in the back corner. It was supposed to help us keep an eye on the aisles, but sometimes I'd catch glimpses of things that shouldn't have been there, shadows moving when the store was empty, faces that didn't belong to any customer. One night, I was closing up when I heard footsteps in the stockroom. I called out thinking it was my coworker, but there was no answer. I walked back, heart pounding, and found the room empty. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something in the security mirror. A tall, dark figure standing behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. I quit the next day. The owner tried to convince me to stay, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something in that store was watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. When you hear stories like these, it's easy to dismiss them as exaggerations or the result of overactive imaginations. But for the people who lived them, the fear was real and the consequences were life-changing. Sometimes it's not just the supernatural that drives someone away from a job forever. Sometimes it's the way a place can twist your sense of reality, or the way a single moment can shatter your trust in the world around you. Tonight, as we move deeper into these accounts, I want you to notice the patterns, the cold spots, the whispers, the feeling of being watched. These are not isolated incidents. They're threads in a tapestry of experiences that stretch across jobs, towns, and even countries. Let's return to the hospital, where our first story began. After the night shift guard quit, the hospital struggled to keep anyone in that position for more than a few weeks. Rumors spread among the staff, and soon, even the bravest employees started requesting transfers. The old wing was eventually sealed off, and the hospital quietly stopped mentioning it to new hires. But the stories didn't stop. Nurses reported seeing lights flicker on in empty rooms, and patients sometimes woke up screaming about a child crawling across the floor. The hospital's reputation suffered, and the administration did everything they could to keep the stories quiet. But the truth has a way of seeping through the cracks, just like the cold air in that abandoned hallway. Contrast that with the warehouse where the shadow man was seen. After the second and third employees quit without warning, management installed new security cameras and increased patrols. But the footage only raised more questions. Shadows would appear and disappear in places no one could reach, and objects would move on their own. One night, a supervisor reviewing the tape saw a tall, thin figure standing in the far corner, just watching. He quit the next day, leaving a note that simply read, "I can't do this anymore." The warehouse eventually closed, and the building was left to rot. another casualty of something no one could explain. The hotel in New Orleans tried to embrace its haunted reputation, offering ghost tours and themed events. But the staff turnover was relentless. Housekeepers refused to clean certain rooms, and guests would check out in the middle of the night, pale and shaken. The management tried to laugh it off, but behind closed doors, they were just as scared as everyone else. The hotel still stands, but it's a shell of its former self, haunted not just by ghosts, but by the memories of those who didn't stay. In the nursing home, the cold room was eventually turned into a storage closet. No one wanted to talk about what happened there, but the residents knew. They'd whisper about the man in the corner, and some would refuse to walk past the door. The staff did their best to keep everyone comfortable, but the sense of unease never left. The nurse who quit still dreams about Mrs. Hargrove, and sometimes wakes up with the feeling that someone is watching her from the shadows. The textile factory was sold to a new owner who brought in fresh equipment and a new crew, but the stories persisted. Workers would find their machines running when they arrived in the morning, and some reported hearing their names whispered in the dark. The new owner tried to dismiss it as nerves, but after a series of unexplained accidents, he shut the factory down for good. The building still stands, a silent monument to the people who left and never looked back. The office building downtown replaced the emergency stairwell doors, but employees still avoid using them. Some say you can hear footsteps echoing late at night, and a few have reported getting stuck between floors, unable to open the doors no matter how hard they try. The company moved to a new location, and the old building was left empty, its stairwell still waiting for the next unlucky soul. The Italian restaurant was bought by a new owner who tried to renovate and reopen, but the cold table remained, untouched and avoided by staff and customers alike. The velvet curtain was replaced, but it never hung quite right, always shifting as if moved by an unseen hand. The new owner lasted less than a year before selling the building, and it's been empty ever since. The call center was demolished, and a new office complex was built in its place. But the construction workers reported strange noises and cold spots, and some refused to work after dark. The company that moved in struggled with high turnover and eventually relocated. The lot is now empty, overgrown with weeds, as if the land itself is trying to forget what happened there. The old hotel downtown was finally torn down, but the hidden room was never mentioned in the official reports. The workers who found it never spoke about it again, and the diary disappeared. Some say the child's voice can still be heard at night, echoing through the empty lot. The city built a park on the site, but few people visit after dark. The convenience store changed hands several times, but the security mirror remained. New employees would sometimes catch glimpses of things that shouldn't be there, and customers would complain about feeling watched. The store eventually closed, and the building was boarded up. But if you walk by late at night, you might still see a shadow moving in the mirror, waiting for someone to notice. It's easy to think that quitting a job is just about finding something better, or escaping a toxic boss, or chasing a new opportunity. But for the people in these stories, the decision was about survival, about reclaiming a sense of safety and sanity that their workplaces had slowly eroded. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you see, but what you feel. The cold that seeps into your bones, the eyes you sense on you when you're alone, the whispers that echo in your mind long after you've left. These are the moments that linger, the ones that make you question what's real and what's just your imagination. Let's take a closer look at what happens after someone walks away from a job like this. For many, the fear doesn't end when they hand in their resignation. Nightmares persist, and the memories of what they experienced follow them into new jobs, new homes, new lives. Some people find themselves unable to talk about what happened, afraid of being dismissed or ridiculed. Others become obsessed, searching for answers, trying to make sense of the unexplainable. A few even return to the places they left behind, hoping to confront their fears or find closure. But most simply move on, carrying the weight of their experiences in silence. There's a kind of solidarity among those who have lived through something like this. They recognize the look in each other's eyes, the haunted, wary glance of someone who's seen too much. They share their stories in hushed tones late at night, when the world is quiet and the shadows seem to grow longer. They know that some places are just wrong, that some jobs come with a price no paycheck can cover. One former nurse, after leaving the cold room behind, found herself drawn to stories of haunted hospitals and abandoned asylums. She started volunteering at a hospice, hoping to find peace in helping others. But every so often, she'd catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of her eye, a shadow moving where there shouldn't be one, a cold draft in a warm room. She learned to live with it, to accept that some things can't be explained. A warehouse worker who quit after seeing the shadow man tried to start over in a new city. He found a job in a grocery store, far from the industrial sprawl of his old life. But sometimes, late at night, he'd see a tall, thin figure reflected in the freezer doors, just for a moment. He never told anyone. He just worked his shifts, kept his head down, and hoped the past would eventually let him go. The housekeeper from the New Orleans hotel moved back to her hometown and found work in a small bed and breakfast. She avoided old buildings, and whenever she had to clean a room alone, she'd leave the door open and the lights on. She never saw another message in the mirror, but she never forgot the feeling of being unwelcome, of being told to leave by something she couldn't see. The construction worker who found the hidden room tried to forget what he'd seen, but the nightmares persisted. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, hearing a child's voice calling for help. He started carrying a small notebook, writing down his dreams in the hope that putting them on paper would make them go away. It helped, a little, but the memory of that room never left him. The server from the Italian restaurant found a new job at a modern cafe, all glass and steel and bright lights. She never had to serve the cold table again, but sometimes when she was closing up, she'd feel a sudden chill and remember the woman's warning. Don't stay here after closing. She always made sure to leave before the last light went out. For the people in these stories, quitting wasn't just about leaving a job. It was about reclaiming their lives, about refusing to let fear define them. They learned to trust their instincts, to listen to the little voice that says, something isn't right. They learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. And what about the places they left behind? Some are still standing, empty and forgotten, while others have been torn down or repurposed. But the stories remain, whispered among new employees, passed down like warnings. Don't go in that room. Don't work the night shift alone. If you hear your name whispered, leave. These are the rules that keep people safe, the lessons learned by those who came before. If you've ever felt uneasy at work, if you've ever sensed that something was watching you, you're not alone. There are places in this world that hold on to the past, that refuse to let go of the people who passed through. And sometimes the only way to escape is to walk away and never look back. There's a strange comfort in knowing that you're not the only one who's ever felt this way. For every person who's walked out of a job because of something they couldn't explain, there are dozens more who've stayed silent, who've convinced themselves it was just stress or fatigue or a trick of the light. But the truth is, these stories are more common than you might think. They're shared in whispers, in online forums, in late-night conversations between friends. They're the stories that make you double-check the locks, that keep you from taking the stairs alone, that make you wonder what's really lurking in the shadows of your workplace. Let's revisit some of the people whose lives were changed forever by what they experienced. The call center worker, after quitting, found herself unable to answer the phone at home without a spike of anxiety. Every time the phone rang, she'd hesitate, half expecting to hear those overlapping whispers on the other end. She changed her number, got rid of her old phone, and even moved to a new apartment. But the fear lingered, a low hum in the background of her life. She started working from home, doing freelance writing, and avoided offices altogether. Sometimes, late at night, she'd hear a faint whisper from the other room, and she'd remind herself that she was safe, that she'd left that place behind. But some things, she realized, follow you no matter how far you run. The convenience store clerk tried to rationalize what he'd seen in the security mirror. He told himself it was just a trick of the light, a reflection of his own movements. But the memory of that tall, dark figure haunted him. He started avoiding mirrors altogether, covering them with towels or turning them to face the wall. He found a new job at a bookstore, surrounded by people and bright lights, but he never felt completely at ease. Sometimes, when he was alone in the stockroom, he'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of his eye, and his heart would race. He never told his new coworkers why he left his old job. Some things, he decided, are better left unsaid. The construction worker who found the hidden room became obsessed with abandoned buildings. He started exploring old factories, hospitals, and schools, searching for answers. He took photos, recorded audio, and even started a blog to document his experiences. But the more he searched, the more questions he found. He realized that every building has its own story, its own secrets, and that some places are better left undisturbed. He never found another room like the one in the hotel, but he never stopped looking. The nurse who left the cold room behind found solace in helping others. She became an advocate for mental health, speaking at conferences and writing articles about the importance of self-care. She never mentioned the real reason she quit her job, but she carried the lessons she learned with her. She knew that sometimes the scariest things aren't the ones you can see, but the ones you feel. The weight of grief, the chill of fear, the sense that something is watching you. She learned to trust her instincts, to listen to her body, and to walk away when something didn't feel right. The server from the Italian restaurant started a support group for people who had experienced strange or traumatic events at work. The group met once a month in a local cafe, sharing stories and offering support. Some members talked about ghosts and hauntings, while others spoke of more mundane horrors, abusive bosses, dangerous working conditions, toxic co-workers. But the common thread was fear and the courage it took to leave. The group grew over time, and the server found comfort in knowing she wasn't alone. As you listen to these stories, you might find yourself remembering moments from your own life, a time when you felt uneasy at work, when you sensed something was off, when you wondered if you should stay or go. Maybe you brushed it off, or maybe you left and never looked back. Whatever your experience, know that you're not alone. There's a community of people out there who understand, who have lived through the same fears, who have found the strength to walk away. And if you're still in a place that makes you uneasy, if you're still hearing whispers in the dark or feeling eyes on you when you're alone, remember this: you have the right to leave. You have the right to protect yourself, to trust your instincts, to choose your own safety over a paycheck. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away. If you've made it this far, you might be wondering what it is about certain places that makes them feel so wrong. Is it the history, the tragedies that happened within their walls, or something deeper, something that lingers, waiting for the next person to cross the threshold? Maybe it's a combination of all these things. Maybe it's the energy we leave behind, the memories that soak into the floors and walls, the echoes of lives lived and lost. Or maybe, as some believe, there are things in this world that defy explanation. Things that feed on fear, on loneliness, on the quiet desperation of people just trying to get through another shift. For the people in these stories, the decision to quit wasn't just about fear. It was about reclaiming control, about refusing to be a victim of forces they couldn't understand. It was about drawing a line and saying, no more. That's not always easy, especially when you need the money, when you have bills to pay and people depending on you. But sometimes, the cost of staying is higher than the cost of leaving. Sometimes your peace of mind, your sense of safety, is worth more than any paycheck. Let's take a moment to reflect on the courage it takes to walk away. It's easy to judge from the outside, to say, I would have stayed, or it was just their imagination. But until you've felt that cold chill, until you've heard your name whispered in an empty room, until you've seen something you can't explain, you can't know what you'd do. Fear is a powerful motivator, and it can push us to do things we never thought possible. It can also teach us about ourselves, about our limits, our values, and our strength. Some of the people in these stories found new paths after quitting. They discovered passions they never knew they had, built new careers, and found communities of people who understood them. Others struggled, haunted by memories and questions that would never be answered. But all of them made a choice to put themselves first, to trust their instincts, to walk away from something that felt wrong. If you're listening to this and you're in a job that makes you uneasy, know that you're not alone. There are others out there who have faced the same fears, who have made the same difficult decisions. Reach out, share your story, and find support. Sometimes just knowing that someone else understands can make all the difference. And if you're one of the lucky ones, if you've never experienced anything like this, take a moment to appreciate the safety and comfort of our workplace. Not everyone is so fortunate. For some, work is a place of fear, of uncertainty, of things that go bump in the night. For them, quitting isn't just about finding a better job, it's about survival. As we come to the end of these stories, I want to thank you for listening, for keeping an open mind, and for honoring the experiences of those who have walked away. Their stories are a reminder that sometimes the scariest things aren't the ones we see in movies or read about in books. Sometimes the real horror is much closer to home. So tonight, as you turn off the lights and settle in for the night, remember the people in these stories. Remember the courage it took to walk away, the strength it took to start over, and the hope that comes from knowing you're not alone. And if you ever find yourself in a place that feels wrong, trust your instincts. Sometimes the best thing you can do is listen to that little voice inside that says, "It's time to go." There's a certain power in sharing these stories, in speaking the truth about what we've seen and felt, even when others might not believe us. For every person who's walked away from a job because of something they couldn't explain, there's a lesson. Your safety, your sanity, and your peace of mind are worth more than any paycheck. The world is full of mysteries, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that you don't have all the answers. And that's okay. If you ever find yourself standing at the edge, wondering if you should stay or go, remember the people you've heard about tonight. Remember the nurse who left the cold room behind, the warehouse worker who saw the shadow man, the housekeeper who ran from the message in the mirror, and all the others who chose themselves over fear. Their stories are proof that you're not alone, and that it's never too late to start over. So, as you close your eyes tonight, let these stories remind you to trust your instincts, to listen to that quiet voice inside, and to know that sometimes walking away is the most courageous thing you can do. Thank you for joining me, for listening, and for keeping these stories alive. Until next time, stay safe, trust yourself, and remember, some doors are better left closed.